So, this lecture covers the first criminological theory that we have. And these theories fall under spiritualism. Spiritualism is also known as a demonic perspective or the pre-classical school. And I'll explain to you in a minute why that is. What's important to understand from this particular lecture is that criminological theory, really up until the 18th century, was based on Western religion. So religion shaped all of the theories of crime, and it shaped the criminal justice system. Now, prior to the 18th century, we didn't really have in the Western world criminal justice systems. Instead, we had the king and queens of the Western countries determining how to assess someone who's been accused of a crime and how to punish someone who was believed to be guilty of a crime. So the first theorist under the realm of spiritualism is St. Thomas Aquinas. So St. Thomas Aquinas wrote many books, but this one book that he wrote, he discussed crime and criminality. And he explained that criminals were possessed by evil spirits. And he believed that because he believed, as most others did during that time, that God made all humans good people. That under natural law, according to God, right, all people have this tendency to do good. So when you didn't do good, when you committed what was considered a sin or some form of evil behavior or crime, then you were thought to be possessed by an evil spirit. You were under some satanic influence. You were possessed by some demon. So your crimes were the result of the devil. And this is where the term the demonic perspective arose. So crime was considered an act of sin. Because it was an act of sin, and because during this time we didn't have what we have today as a criminal justice system, the kings and the queens of the Western world had the divine right to rule. Now, the divine right is power, right, from God. So God gave the king and queens the right to rule. Now, just to be clear, criminology as a whole, as a discipline, is really shaped by theorists from the United Kingdom and theorists from the United States. So this particular perspective of spiritualism comes from the United Kingdom, where the king and queen of England had this divine right to rule. And if you were someone who was accused of committing a crime or an act of sin, then the king and queen had the moral authority given to them by God to punish this sinner. Because it was given to them by God, their power to rule, their power to assess the accused, their power to punish the sinner was not questioned by the public. The king and queen actually had the right to impose gruesome, brutal, torturous sanctions on the sinner. They can even use brutal and torturous methods to assess if the accused was guilty or innocent. During this time, the public, king and queen included, believed that God would never let the innocent die. God would always save the innocent. So the king and queen would assess someone accused of a sin through multiple methods. They had trials by battle, they had trials by ordeal, and they had compurgation. And these kinds of trials, battle and ordeal, and even compurgation, and the punishments on sinners were often done in front of the church as religious symbolism and as a public spectacle. So, a trial by ordeal is when a person's innocence is tested by putting them in a dangerous position or having them engage in a very difficult test. So, you can swallow some poison, we can make you carry a very red hot piece of iron over a certain distance. And they believed that, again, if you were innocent, God would save you. But if you were guilty, then you would get burns or blisters, etc. So a trial by ordeal meant that you could have been burned, and if you were guilty, then clearly you would die, or they would slowly torture you to death. And actually, in one very famous case, is this particular individual named Jean Callis, who was accused of murdering his son for converting to Catholicism. And one of the really famous methods of ordeal, of trial by ordeal, is the St. Catherine wheel. So Catherine's wheel was a wheel in which an individual was attached to this wheel and beaten. So the wheel was spun and they were beaten and beaten and beaten. And again, if you were innocent, you would have survived. If you didn't survive, then you were clearly guilty. And so they put your body towards the end on a spoke, still on the wheel, and they allowed the birds and the crows to eat you, which is a pretty gruesome and horrible act. So that's the trial by ordeal. Trial by battle is when, and this is actually, trial by battle was really only given to the nobles during that time, who were accused of some sort of sin, while trial by ordeal was given to the lower classes. So if you were a noble, man or woman actually, you can go to trial by battle. And again, the innocent person, they believed, would win the battle. So you would have two nobles with their swords in front of the church battling it out. And the guilty person, they believed God would die. So the last way of assessing the accused is compurgation. Compurgation was when people swore for a person's innocence that they were good, and they believed that because you swore before God, you would fear God's punishment and be clearly telling the truth. I'm assuming this sounds familiar to you because we still do this today in the courtroom. We engage in compurgation when we swear before a religious text and we say that we swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So spiritualism, or the demonic perspective, or the pre-classical era, as you could imagine, had very harsh sanctions for sinners and even gruesome and horrible ordeals for those who were accused of a crime. And while you can all sit here and think that this is a kind of odd theory, I'm sure you've heard family members, maybe your grandparents, mention that the devil is in that child. The idea that something is wrong with that person. If you're really interested in more about this, you can always watch The Exorcism. That might help. So that's all on spiritualism and the demonic perspective. This is actually the lead in to the next lecture, which is on the classical era, which is why this lecture, or this perspective, is known as the pre-classical era.